Today, we're going to be talking about feeling like we have to live up to the mega church hype as worship leaders. Stay tuned. Hey, welcome to Worship Launch. My name is Zach Dietz, and we're going to be talking about feeling like we have to live up to the mega church hype as worship leaders today. And from the outset of this video, I just want to say that there are many advantages that mega churches have over smaller churches, and that I'm not saying that mega churches are bad. Please hear me on that. Great resources and ministries come out of mega churches. So I just want to preface this video with that so that you don't hear what I'm not saying. There are great mega churches. So with that said, I'd like to add, but we've all heard the phrase keeping up with the Joneses. And I think that phrase is applicable to worship leaders as well when we are maybe in smaller churches and looking at mega churches and the resources that they have. And so what I'd like to do is just offer 3 points today on this topic, just as a caution to worship leaders. So the first thing I would like to say to maybe worship leaders of smaller churches, or maybe not mega churches, is just know the culture of your church. Here's what I mean by that. A lot of worship leaders will try to rush into making the culture of the church adapt to them rather than the opposite. And I say, spend time getting to know your people and adapt your ministry to what works for your church's culture. I believe this is what Paul means in 1 Corinthians 9:22 by saying, I have become all things to all people. Part of Paul's calling was to preach to the Gentiles, and that required him to change elements of his approach when needed. And you can read his full statement in 1 Corinthians 9, verses 19 through 23 on that. So what I'm saying to you is, don't have preconceptions of how your ministry should look like until you've immersed yourself in the church's culture. Don't expect your worship team to be the next fill-in-the-blank great worship team making dozens of albums. That may not even be the heartbeat of your church. And so what I'm saying to you is just immerse yourself in your church's culture, get to know them, and adapt your ministry to the culture of the church. So the second thing I would say is plant roots where you're at, and don't view where you're at as a stepping stone to get to the next big church. This is huge. A lot of worship leaders see serving in a smaller church for a time sort of as a stepping stone to get to a larger church. And my word of caution to you would be that the people in your church where you're at deserve better than that. What if God doesn't want you serving in a larger church? What if His heart is for you to serve in lifelong ministry in a small church? And the question I would ask is the matter of size what is important to God's heart? Or is it that we shepherd His people? And so I would encourage you. And honestly, I have been guilty of this very thing. When I was in a smaller church, there were times in my ministry where like, man, God, if I just had the resources of a bigger church, we could do so much more here. And so I found myself wanting, and I don't believe that's where God wants our hearts to be. And so I say, plant your feet where you are and let God make that decision for you. It's not your decision to make. God calls you to places. And so it just be where he has you for now. Be rooted there. Plant deep roots. And if God calls you away, then allow him to make that decision. And the third thing I would say is give God the best you can with what he's given you. A lot of worship leaders fret if they don't have a full band assembled, or if their full band isn't great. And my advice to you would be pour into what God has provided for you. God has provided those people for you. Or maybe he hasn't. Maybe it's just you. And maybe if it's you and maybe a keyboardist, I would say work together to give God your best. And notice I didn't say give the congregation your best. Every aspect of worship is for him and only him. So work with that keyboardist to get better for God's glory. Get better at serving God with your craft. And maybe it's only you and not anybody else. And what I would say to you is, if it's you and no one else, you work at your craft to get better, and you give him everything you've got. Pour everything into worship if it's you alone. See, I think it's real easy for us as worship leaders to get caught up into the trap of seeing all the resources the mega churches have and trying to force that upon your situation. And what that does is it leaves us feeling like failures in ministry. And when that may not be what God wants at all from you in worship. So my final word would be to examine your motives as the worship leader of your church. Why are you doing what you're doing? Is it because God called you to that church? If it is, then don't look so much at what's happening in mega churches. Look at your church and ask God, okay, God, how can I make this worship ministry in this church with what I have? How can I make it the best possible for you? And I think it's so easy to just say, I want to be the next big worship team and make albums and stuff, when you may not have those resources, and that's okay. Be where you're at and do a good job of shepherding your people where you're at. So that's all I've got for today. Thanks. Hope this was encouraging and beneficial for you and your ministry. Join us next week. Thanks.